second component, what we refer to as matching data. It's data that is proprietary to each of the 4 organizations, but it exists and it is shared between the 4 only, to make sure that we can match other data that is public to data that we might have, so that we can find duplicates and understand, really to match data that others might hold with what's already out there, and so that we can create links and understand the relationships and currency of that data. So just wanted to share that that's sort of how we looked at it as well, sort of that kind of a split. But the other thing I wanted to say, and might be maybe an obvious one here as well, we're not the first one to think about this, and there's a lot of policies. If you think about EU policies on privacy, and if you think about the specifics of certain countries, how they go about it, they might actually restrict us from doing specific things. So it's also really hard to have one, if you like, global policy at this end as well. We have to almost localize it and realize that there's so many different parts of the world that might have specific things if we publish there.
Yes, that's a very helpful thing to say, and I think that's something we need to look at very carefully. And also we need to, though I think at the same time we need to beware of turning this into a very detailed legal document. What we're trying to do is to get a kind of the spirit of collaboration, so that we can improve the data sharing in the ways that you've suggested, and get people working together. It's actually as much a process as a document that we're really looking for, and trying to get this, the philanthropy field established better through better knowledge and understanding. And getting the key principles right. And I love the first part of what you said there, Paul. I wonder whether we could move on now to the issue of access and sharing. Perhaps in an ideal world, there would be a full and open exchange of data, metadata, and all kinds of products. But we've heard one example of how that's done. Other people is there other experience that we could learn from? Larry, do you have anything particular at the Foundation Center that you could contribute to this part of the discussion?
This is Jeff, Foundation Center.
Oh, okay. Hi, Jeff.
So yeah, we've done data sharing with even some of the people on this call. We've had data sharing projects with SEMEFE, with GFE, the China Foundation Center, and generally, I mean, a single document's not going to cover the relationships between 2 of the organizations that sign on to the charter, right? It's going to be negotiation between 2 organizations about what kind of data they're going to share with each other, what kind of data, how each organization respectively can use that data, what kind, to Patrick's point, what kinds of data elements in particular they're going to share, not just like what fields of interest, fields within that data element. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, we have lots of experience sharing data globally.
Yes, I mean, I think what we're trying to do is to create a framework rather than a kind of protocol for individual exchanges. But Jeff, do you have any particular learning that we could kind of take advantage of in terms of thinking about sharing?
So, I mean, some of the projects that we worked on, for instance, we worked with an organization called International Human Rights Funders Group, and they in turn worked with Ariadne in Europe to get data on philanthropic activities around human rights issues. And obviously, in that case, you've got a lot of security concerns, privacy concerns, people's lives potentially being in danger based on the kind of data you might be sharing on the platform. So in many cases, we've taken specific data based on specific requests by foundations. Again, this is what we call open data. Some of these are behind member firewalls, password protected sites. But even so, we've aggregated and anonymized the names of donors, the names of recipients, even the amounts of grants that were being given to nonprofits, just because of the potential personal threat of harm to the donors and nonprofits involved. So this is Larry. It may be also useful at the level of the framework to talk about maybe 3 different categories of access or public availability of data. And one of those would be data that would always be public. There may be some categories of information that we can come to some widespread agreement on and always be made public. There may be data that can be conditionally made public, in which case you have to have explicit opt-in order to make those data public. You have to have some permission on file in order to make those data public. And then there may be other situations where there is data never to be made public. And it may be useful to try to develop some specific examples of the types of data that might fall into each of those categories to serve as guidance for people thinking about this issue at the general level.
Right, yes. That's a very helpful thought. Other experience.
Sorry.
Carmen, have you anything to this part of the discussion?
On sharing data?
Yeah.
So I guess there's a couple things that come to mind. I think we have a system as part of our data sharing policy that companies can agree to share within our corporate network. So that's kind of a community-based sharing agreement that exists. And then we've also negotiated particular agreements with different organizations that might combine efforts. An example of that is that we collaborated with the Conference Board, also based here in New York, to collect data one time around corporate philanthropy and then consider it a joint effort so that companies aren't asked to report the same information twice, and then use that data shared with the Conference Board and their contributions councils, as well as to produce giving and numbers. So again, it was obviously a negotiation specific that we had to kind of agree to all the different parameters with that organization. But we think in the end, in terms of producing data, it was a win for all parties because companies had to invest less resources, did not have to report to 2 different efforts, and still had the same benefits of access to data and analysis and trends on the other end of the agreement. And right now CCP has our global guide standard, which we're collecting data against right now, and we think that when it comes to sharing data, we are going to kind of conduct some custom analysis with the organizations that have been collaborating with us on it. Once again, those providing the data only need to do it once, and then we can provide the analysis at the outset. So we think that that's a definite win. For all involved, because we are accessing the data and we're not asking the producers of the data to share it in multiple different places, or we're trying to reduce that as much as possible.
That's really interesting, and I like that phrase, where everyone wins. I mean, that's an ideal kind of scenario, really. Lorena from SMEFI, have you experience of sharing data?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, good morning. Yes, for example, in our case, in terms of the directory that we have with NGOs, it is open, so everyone can, any organization that fulfills the requirements that we ask, it's able to give us the information, and we will upload that information, although it also has to have our process to see if the information we are receiving from them is accurate. So we have to analyze that information previously making it public. And in case of the directory that we have for donors, I think that that treatment of the information is more close because we don't share it with everyone. It's always open for those foundations that gave us the information, and they can always make changes on their own information, but also validated by us. And this directory is only open to them, to the members of SMEFI, and also to the organizations that are willing to pay a fee in order to have the access to the directory. So we always, in the documents that we ask them and in the information, we always put a legend there where it says that just in case they give us the opposite information, but all the information will be shared and public in terms of the first directory, and in the second one will be shared with the members of CEMEFI and with the people that will pay for that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. This issue of payment is an important one, and it's arisen in a number of contexts. Has anybody got thoughts about this, whether you know, payment is actually a restrictive dimension to this?
Well, Barry, this is Patrick. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I'm glad this came up because I wanted to mention that you know, there are several affinity groups that I'm familiar with in the U.S. that, specifically in the environment funding area, where a big part of the activity of the affinity group is the collection of detailed data from the members. And they do, these affinity groups, they do publish aggregate information, but the detailed data is only available to members. And membership in these organizations usually does mean not only being a funder in this particular type of environmental grant making, but also you know, providing funding to the affinity group. So I think there's a real challenge there because it's not only the payment, but I believe some level of trust because you're in a like-minded group of funders. So I don't know how we deal with that, but I think it's a relatively common phenomenon across at least the U.S. philanthropy sector. These topical affinity groups that have very valuable data, but are not in a position to release it publicly.
Yeah, I think it's not just the U.S. I've encountered it elsewhere too. So I think it's something that we really need to get to grips with. Thank you very much, Patrick. Anyone else got any thoughts on this really critical issue? Anybody got any experience of this issue?
Yeah, this is Jeff again.
Oh, Jeff.
All right. So yeah, as most of the people on the call know, we do charge for either for access to certain of our databases. You know, many of those data are available free to the public through libraries, not necessarily from one of our subscription services. And we also have sector-related platforms that, while we don't charge a fee for, are usually paid for through funding by a foundation or a donor of some kind. So you know, it's important and it's critical that as we use data, to be clear with our data partners how the data is going to be used and in what ways and whether there is going to be a fee associated with the usage of that data. Because obviously, you know, the provider of that data is going to want to A, understand that, and B, potentially want a piece of whatever revenue is generated from that data.
Although to be, you know, a little bit more fine-tuned about that, I mean, what we're talking about also is covering costs associated with collecting, cleaning, and organizing and providing access to the data. You know, which should be, you know, I think distinguished from the original data per se at some level when we're talking about the issues of payment and compensation for services provided. So, you know, we're a nonprofit organization, so we're not trying to, you know, turn this into, you know, a profit-making activity. But there are costs entailed in making sure that data that is collected in raw form can be accessed in a useful form.
Other contributions on this issue of payment? Anybody else got any experience? No?
This is Patrick. I can add one more thought on this.
Yes.
I think you know, just capturing what Larry said in some way, that recognizing that data aggregators do incur costs to improve the quality of data and make it useful. But also, I think there's a connection, something of a connection between standards and those costs. And it's from my experience working with foundations and trying to get foundations to generate data about their grant making in ways that are, where the data could be combined very easily. And there's quite a bit of difficulty because we all describe things differently, and then that does necessitate, data aggregators to clean and curate the data. But some notion that that where possible, keeping in mind that applying standards to your own publication of data does lower the costs and barriers ultimately, to the consumer. I think is if others support that, I think that it's a important principle. It's definitely a stretch right now because we're low on standards, but I think there are some practical things that can be done there.
Yes, and of course standards is something that is the next item on the agenda. Maybe that's something that was the natural segue to get into that. How can we conciliate the need between standards which facilitate comparability and interoperability, I can never say it, interoperability, and the different contexts in different regions? Because this is a critical issue, and it's one that's interesting me because trying to do some work with Wings on the and the Global Fund on community philanthropy, it would be very helpful to have common standards and indicators and stuff like that. How do people think about this? This is an issue that came up in Rio quite well. It would be good to get some other thoughts about that. Perhaps people who haven't contributed so far might like to contribute to this issue from their experience.
Well, not to jump in because I have spoken already, but this is Carmen from CCP again, and I just wanted to jump in because setting standards is definitely something that CCP has taken a lot of care and effort into in our work. The Global Guide standard we just released was developed together with Deloitte, so we certainly see when developing standards, the key principles there are around a really strong foundation in research. In our case, to develop the standard for the corporate community, it was we used an international tax team from Deloitte to study the 17 countries with the highest concentration of Global 2000 firms, and what are their policies around what organizations qualify or don't qualify for corporate philanthropy. So that foundation in research, I think, is really important. But secondly, to develop a standard which is truly impactful and able to be used by practitioners, we also had many touch points around practitioner engagement. So we had an advisory council, we had a public comment period, we had a final working group to review the standard. So we think that combining research with practitioner engagement is something that is probably a really useful way to create a standard which has the solid foundation based in regulation and other things, but also it can be used by the people that you intend to apply it. So that standard is now, we've done a pilot with it last year, and we're in the process of using it again. So I think that this is really the true test of whether the standard will kind of carry forward and be used by companies. I guess a challenge, thinking about how it might relate to the charter, is that we have developed it with corporate philanthropy in mind. And I'm sure that the standard, we think that it could apply, but I think we'd love to hear from others whether it can translate to community philanthropy, individual philanthropy, and it's really focused around what to include or exclude as far as what's a defined recipient. So, that's kind of something that we'd be happy to share. And then not just the standard itself, but also the process that we use to create it, because I'm not sure if I fully understand the vision with the charter, if it's to kind of move behind and create a new standard which can be sort of all-encompassing for global philanthropy, or whether it's to be something that existing standards should sort of sign on to.
Well, that's a very helpful contribution, and I'd love to see that document would be a very useful resource for us, Carmen, not just the fact that you've got the standards, but also the process, because that's the kind of thing that I think the field needs. And I certainly know in working in community philanthropy, it would be a really helpful way forward. And I suspect that the principles wouldn't be that different, regardless of the category. Who else would like to contribute to this idea of standards? Any further thoughts? Anybody who's... Larry?
Yes, this is Larry. One thing to perhaps keep in mind is that standards of one sort or another will exist, whether people give thought to them or not. The standards are higher when people give thought to them, but there are always standards that exist in sort of a default mode, and I think the question is to examine what kinds of standards have actually been developed through some thoughtful processes like the ones that we've worked on here at the Foundation Center for many years, the ones that CECP has worked on in its own sphere, and to share the learnings about the decisions that need to be made at different points in setting standards. In other words, I'm trying to suggest that while it's useful to come up with some standards in principle, you don't have to start from scratch necessarily. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Other thoughts on standards?
Yes, Jeff. The one thing I would add to Larry's very insightful comment is that there are other more broadly global standards that already exist as well that we might be able to take advantage of, like an EADI, that is more of an all-encompassing global development standard, and see how and I know Hewlett already reports to EADI, and see if there are standards that could be applied, and not necessarily say all organizations have to use this standard, but have that be the central focus point through which all other standards are mapped to, and maybe then that all data could be aggregated via an ADI lens or the ADI filter, so therefore all data becomes interoperable.
Yeah. Okay.
And I wonder if I could just add one more thing that actually does appear in the charter in its current draft. We have privileged in the charter the necessity for understanding the situation of local philanthropy in its own region, in its own terms, prior to attempting to relate what is happening in local areas to a set of broader ways of describing philanthropy, a broader set of standards for categorizing aspects of philanthropy. And I think that remains a very, very important principle. It suggests that understanding at the local level needs to precede, the relating of what's going on at the local level to a set of standards.
Right, that's very helpful. Thank you. Okay. Any further comments about standards? No. Well, let's move then.
Hi, this is Parsi. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi, this is Parsi Sefi with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I have a question about the standards topic. I believe Wings is doing some work. If you could speak to that a bit, or maybe Helena to speak about, I believe there was a survey done at some point to try to begin to understand from the different associations that are Wings members how they define philanthropy, especially when in the context of when it's not coded in the law in certain countries where there's no maybe tax benefit to giving. So that would be great to hear within the context of this conversation.
Helena, would you like to respond to that? Hello, Helena. Anna, could you, I think Helena's not online, could you respond to the question? People, Helena and Anna, I got a just kind of message, they're having problem with mics. I've just got a private message from Anna. I'm going to reply to it.
Perhaps, if you can hear me, this is Larry in New York. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do my best to sort of step in at the moment because we're trying to assist Helena and on this work that was just being referred to. There's an effort that's happening in parallel to this Global Data Charter work, which involves looking at the existing surveys that are in use in different regions of the world to collect data on philanthropy in those regions. And we are in the process of trying to identify areas where the commonality in the way the questions are being asked appears to be very high, and other areas where there appears to be a lot of difference in terms of the strategies for collecting types of information about philanthropy. The good news on this is that if we are interested in the possibility of collecting data on some elements of philanthropy in a unified way around the world, there are probably there's probably a good set of questions that are already very close to being collected in similar ways in different regions of the world, and this includes surveys that we received from Europe, from Latin America, from Asia, and from Africa, as well as the United States. So that work is continuing, and I should also mention that in particular, we're receiving a great deal of assistance from Daphne, the Donors and Foundations Network in Europe, which is helping us have conversations with the members of the Daphne associations to work through some of the complicated issues regarding asking certain kinds of questions that are not asked in the same way in different countries. I hope that is responsive to your question.
How does that deal with your question?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Good. Let's move on to the one sort of criticism we've had from a couple of people is the actual focus of the charter, and people saying, what is this charter really for? Is it an action plan? Is it going to set out a series of events that are going to happen? Or is it simply a statement of, intent with signatories? What is it? And I mean, we wondered whether that mattered, what you think, whether it could be both of those things. I mean, our general view is that we want to improve the standards of understanding about philanthropy across the world, and that the Charter is a means of getting that, improving sharing, improving quality of data, improving the relationships between people who collect, analyze, and report on data, and generally to get a series of principles that that govern the ways in which researchers, practitioners, and others think about and report on the field. We'd also like to see if we are successful in this endeavor, whether who the people that actually are involved in this are. Should we call them supporters or should we call them signatories? And having this group of people with those questions would be really helpful. So do you think it matters that we are precise in our ambitions, or whether we you know, part action plan, part statement of values. Is that okay? And should we call people supporters rather than signatories of this? So I'd love your views. Could I pick on somebody? Can I pick on you, Lorena? All right. Who would like to? Anybody like to you know, to think about that? Patrick, how about you?
Sure. I think it's important we actually answer this question and be clear, because you know, I think as people look to this, they'll just want to know what category to put it in. And I guess I lean a bit more towards the statement of values than the specific action plan. For the reason, even though I in general like to be involved in things that actually produce, you know, tangible outcomes, I worry a little bit that the action plan, the specifics, would take quite a bit of time to work out and would almost lend the whole thing to a bit more critique. And just, you know, would maybe not be possible, and even in the time frame we're anticipating. In any case, I would lean towards the lighter, you know, values and supporters versus signatory, because I believe that, you know, signatory does imply commitment to specific action generally. So that's my general feeling.
What do others think of that suggestion? Essentially, that, as Patrick says, we should focus on values and principles rather than action, and we should have the lighter term supporters rather than the more legalistic form of signatories, which would kind of imply action. Other views on that? It would certainly fit with our notion of providing a framework, you know, a framework for the field rather than a kind of prescriptive set of actions for the field. Carmen, do you have a view on that?
Unfortunately, I can't say that I do. I read the charter before the call, which was kind of my first encounter with it, and was hoping to learn more about the overarching objectives. We're certainly interested in ways to collaborate, increase the use of data and measurement and metrics, and also therefore obviously transparency, and seeing ways that standards can come together, that there doesn't, you know, that we're not creating additional noise or layering standards upon standards, but to try to find where we can have commonality and consistent data. So, I mean, we're interested in all the principles, and I guess don't have a strong opinion. I mean, clearly it's easier to make a statement as a supporter than a signatory. But then I think connecting the charter to what is the intended outcome of having a list of supporters or signatories, and what's kind of the action that comes after that, I guess, would be sort of my question. But certainly interested in everyone's opinions, and also hearing sort of the motivation behind creating the charter, and how that, you know, whether you're a signatory or a supporter would connect to the overarching objectives of its creation.
Thank you very much, Carmen. That's very helpful. Haneen, would you like to comment? Anyone else like to comment?
Barry, given the silence, I'll just jump in and add a couple more thoughts. If we do go this route that I suggested, I do think, you know, a good question that someone could ask is, well, what will be different as a result of the charter? And we should be ready for that. And I do think that there are some activities that could follow the charter. there could be, working groups of folks who are actually inspired by the charter and want to, develop standards but need, peer support. There could be a knowledge base. There could be, Wings itself might want to step up their own data collection, but having a few, concrete answers to that of, what will be different. It strikes me as important, and I think that because of all the context issues and the the subtleties we talked about, having, rather than prescriptive, having kind of opt-in activities that are tangible and action oriented, but making them essentially opt-in.
Yes, thank you.
Seems like a good approach.
Okay, thank you. Anybody got any thoughts about the tangible things that ought to be different as a result of this charter? Because I think that's a good way of thinking about it. One or two people are having trouble with mics, I know. But any thoughts on that? Any thoughts about the signatories versus, anybody want to say that there should be signatories, for example? The supporters seem, oh sorry. Hello?
Yes, it's Larry. I tend to agree with Patrick's position on this at the moment for a couple of reasons. You stated, I think, very early in the conversation, a very important point, I think, is that this is not a document that's intended to police anybody. And I think that sort of throws it in the direction of a statement of values and principles. And we would want to keep it focused at that level. I also agree with what someone else said, it may have been Carmen, about the fact that you could spend an awful lot of time working through details. And I think that those kinds of details are premature to work through without having some concrete trial and error experience in specific contexts. The fact that we are working right now, for example, at the level of looking at questionnaires that are already in use and working specifically with Daphne, for example, gives us a kind of a testing ground to see whether these principles work when we try to apply them in practice. And I think emerging from those experiences will be the possibility of some action steps that can take place. But I think that's a separate process that will emerge through a lot of additional interaction and trying to work through some practical projects on the ground.
I think that's very helpful. I think that's very helpful because it's actually when you're doing things is when you really need the charter. And in the I'm involved with the Cleveland Foundation at the moment, as is the Foundation Center, Wings, and the Global Fund for Community Foundations on a piece of data collection. And we have decided that we would test out the charter as we go. And even though it's only in draft form, it has already proved useful in terms of getting people around a table who haven't ever worked with one another before to give them some kind of guidelines and some kind of, at least they know the kind of spirit in which they want to work, which is quite useful. And I think if we could use it in concrete examples, then it's a real a real kind of step. I've just got a message which I need to read. It's somebody's having trouble with Mike. And it's a message from Haneen, who's having problems with the her mic, saying that the Arab Foundation Forum is very open to participate in this process and help with us because they would really like to upgrade the kind of knowledge base of the philanthropy sector there. So that's extremely good news. Thank you, Haneen. That's terrific. This is, we're coming towards the end of this session. This has been extremely helpful. I want to, before I kind of sum up, like to ask if there's anything else that you'd like to raise before I do that, that we need to take into account before I kind of try and summarize our discussion. Anybody like to make a final sort of comment or question or worry or concern?
Barry, I'll throw out, this is Patrick, I'll throw out one suggestion. I know a number of standards have been alluded to both, at the meeting in Rio and here, and I do wonder if there could be an appendix to the document with either, links to additional reading on the topic or highlighting existing standards, just so that there'd be, something for readers who actually want to dig in and learn more, the easy access to those resources.
That's a great idea. I have in my head that this document will be relatively brief and will be at the level of principle, as you suggested before. But I do think there could be annexes, and I think it would be really helpful if, since we've got such a kind of practically minded group of people on the call today, if you could send us links, that would be really good. We already have some examples of things on the WINGS website that you might want to take a look at and review. But I do like the idea of having a more for people who really want to get to grips with this issue, for example, around standards or around privacy, because that may come out up in certain kinds of situations. So I agree we should do that.
Barry?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Lorena from CEMEFI. I also agree with Patrick in the idea of having the charter as like the general perspective, but I also think that in the future we should think of a way of having some proof or evidence that those that sign the charter are really committed to do that and are really putting that into practice. So probably in the future, in the near future, kind of report or something like that the organizations that we sign the charter can show that we are really applying the principles that we are signing in the charter.
Oh, I like that a lot. That really does. I mean, and it's also reminded me of a risk of this is that we work very hard until WINGS Forum, then we produce a charter, and then nobody ever looks at it again. I think we do need to have, to make it into a living document and much more of a process rather than just a piece of paper that sits on your shelf and everybody forgets about. So I think that's a really important dimension, Lorena, that we actually, because I think even bringing people together through this process has been really helpful in advancing the field in terms of its understandings, because people have all sorts of interesting other side conversations. So, the charter ought to be a kind of a way of working rather than just a physical document. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts?
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, well, it's just really not a photo, just to introduce myself. This is João from IDIS in Brazil, and I have hi there. I have just joined IDIS recently, and I was eager to participate today in this webinar. So, because we are very interested in understanding and supporting the work that's undergoing. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to read the charter before this meeting, but so I wasn't able to support you with ideas or comments. But hopefully, I will be able to do that in the next meeting.
Thank you so much. Yes, I mean this is a process that's going to continue, and there will be other opportunities we're not, you know, in the line that Lorena said, this needs, if this is going to work, it needs to be a participative process. So people will have opportunities to contribute right up until it's kind of finalized and hopefully signed off in March. And after that, we will, of course, you know, make it work, and it will be a segue into improved action. And we need to sort of follow up and evaluate all that. So basically, I think we've now run out of time. I'm very happy with this meeting. We've tackled 4 rather tough issues, and what we will do now is to incorporate, rather than write up a note of this meeting, what we will do is to incorporate your suggestions into the charter itself, so that it will be a further developed and established document that addresses those kinds of issues. And that will be republished, and there will be opportunities to talk about this more. And we will certainly be holding a meeting in Europe. There's some talk about holding a meeting in the Arab region, and that would be great. There's also some talking about holding something in Africa, but we can only do so much. But these kinds of webinars are very useful ways in create and adjust principles, so that we, in a sense, the group that drafted this in Rio is now seeing the fruits of its work develop in a more even more kind of sort of interesting and useful way, and we want to continue this this process. So thank you all so much for taking this hour to spend with your expertise. Those of you who have promised documents, please would you send them to Anna. Those of you who have got links that we can use in the annex that we will, that Patrick suggested, please do so. Those of you who have further thoughts, I mean, we're open at all times to, to your views and to the next reactions on the, on the next iteration. So thank you so much for being part of this, because, this is not particularly for wings. This is for the field, and in a sense, we're part of the field that this is going to work for. So, we need this. This is benefit for all of us, really, who care about this sector and the information and knowledge and wisdom that actually supports that. So, thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Barry.